Okay, everybody. I think you guys can hear me out there. We're just waiting on a few participants to hop on. So we will start just momentarily. While we're waiting, I will start with some introductions. Let everybody know what is going on for today and what our agenda is. So today we are broadcasting live. Dr. Springer is at Operation Freedom Paws with Mary Cartani. And Operation Freedom Paws, they help veterans and individuals train their own service dogs. And Mary Cartani is a military veteran that has been nominated as a CNN hero. And Operation Freedom Paws is really an important partner with Stella because we've been collaborating to support each other's efforts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We are featuring Mary briefly today, and we'll be highlighting our partnership. So Dr. Shauna Springer is Stella's chief psychologist, and she does not see patients at Stella. However, she does serve as our guide to ensure that everything that we do is grounded in trauma-informed care. She is a trusted advisor to a vast network of veterans and military families, is recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on psychological trauma, and has been frequently sought after by media professionals for her unique perspective on trauma, post-traumatic growth, and psychological health. We also want to welcome today Robin Saunier. She is a licensed professional counselor, a national certified counselor, and a certified clinical trauma professional, and a doctorate of professional counseling. She is specializes in working with the military population in the treatment of trauma and substance abuse disorders. She is also a clinical director for the Acadiana Veteran Alliance HEAL program and has her own successful private practice down in Louisiana. So we welcome Robin. We're very excited to have you here. We will hear her talk firsthand about the work that she's done with patients before, during, and after stellate ganglion block. And our topics today, speaking of that, will be related to some recently published data on the efficiency of stellate ganglion block for trauma. We'll highlight Stella's treatment outcomes, and we'll discuss those collaborations that I mentioned earlier in the introduction of Operation Freedom Paws. So just as a reminder, before we get started, questions and answers will be toward the end of the presentation, but feel free to go ahead and log those in your Q&A if you'd like, and I will make note to ask those later. There will be links available if you'd like to receive the email after the presentation to get a recording of this. Just contact me and I'll be happy to send that to you. And if you're interested in getting more information about becoming a Stella provider or working within our network, just let us know, and all the emails will be at the end. So without further ado, Shauna, please take it away.
Thanks, Penny. Robin, it's great to have you here. I'm so excited to elevate the work that you're doing. And I really want to create functional and meaningful partnerships, not only with the network of providers across the country that does the critical work that happens after stellate ganglion block, but also with partnering organizations. So it's really fun that I get to stream this live webinar from Operation Freedom Paws here in Northern California. You might see some things behind me. There's a beautiful stained glass piece that somebody created. I'm borrowing their office. I'm on site. And later on, I'm going to be able to watch some puppy yoga, which sounds so fun and intriguing, and then do some training with the dogs that are being served by Operation Freedom Paws and through this partnership we have with Stella. So Mary will make a little cameo later, but we really wanted to focus on the work that people like Robin are doing across the country in terms of using the opportunity that SGB provides to really do some deep work that helps people maintain long-term gains after they get a stellate ganglion block. And this journey, this combined care, tells us things about recovering from trauma that are really important for advancing the field. So that's really going to be our topic today. Let's start with a little overview. I'm going to do a small didactic portion of this webinar, and then I'm really going to have a conversation and tap Robin's expertise around some of the work that she does. So post-traumatic stress impacts 8 million or more, probably way more after this year of trauma. These are statistics from before COVID made landfall, that we know that post-traumatic stress leads to all kinds of adverse outcomes that we all want to avoid. Unemployment, substance abuse, just wasted potential. And we know that the stellate ganglion block, based on our data, has an 83% chance of helping people find significant relief from their worst biological symptoms of trauma. So we think about stellate ganglion block as, to use the words of my patient Arturo Weber, who will be featured in a future Stella webinar, it is the primer before the paint. That's what he shared about his experience after getting the stellate ganglion block. He dug in and did some really wonderful work with that window of opportunity, and that's how he describes it, as the primer before the paint. So we know that, there's a world of suffering right now, again, especially after this year. That more than half of men and women experience a traumatic event at some point during their lifetime. It doesn't mean they're all going to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, but really Stella really treats the hyperarousal symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So we don't require that people we treat have a PTSD diagnosis. We look at an assessment of whether they have the target symptoms, which have been identified in research by Lynch and colleagues. It's the hyperarousal symptoms that really this seems to most directly target. So those symptoms are, the sleeplessness, the difficulties concentrating, hypervigilance, where you're always sort of looking for a threat, the chronic startle response, someone walks up behind you and you jump out of your skin, the flooding of anxiety or panic attacks, and the surges of irritability or anger, often that seem unrelated to life events. Those are the hyperarousal symptoms. And this is what stellate ganglion block has been known to treat according to the research literature. So these are the target symptoms that we're looking for. And if we look at it from that zoomed out perspective, all of these figures are going to be greatly expanded. There are many people who would never meet a criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder in the conventional sense, who now, after this year of trauma, have all of those target symptoms. And so when people are suffering with those symptoms and they need relief for those, stellate ganglion block is a promising option that I want to make sure people know about. So let me give you a quick overview of stellate ganglion block and the work at Stella. First, our understanding is based on the paradigm shift that post-traumatic stress is a biological injury, that trauma exposure causes a biological injury that is maintained by changes in how we think and behave and relate to other people. So trauma is not a mysterious, invisible injury, as it's been classified in the past. It's not invisible because we can see it on a brain scan, and we know that a healed brain looks different from an injured brain. And SGB, is really used as a precision medicine intervention for targeting those hyperarousal symptoms that I just talked about. So it's associated with changing the fight or flight system from being chronically overactivated and hyperaroused to being calm again. And it seems to reboot the adrenaline system to a calm state when we get an effective outcome. And we do in the vast majority of cases. As I said, our data is about 83% of the time, based on a sample of 327 patients treated by Stella between 2016 and 2019. On that injection, we get about an 83% success rate. What we found is that by refining that process, we actually are up around 90%, but I can't speak to that in any firm way, because in the prior case of the 83%, we have IRB approval, and we've done a retrospective analysis, and we are pending, publication on those results, and we haven't done anything as yet to formally study our 90% outcome. But that is, what our internal data outcomes suggest. So what does this look like? So what happens is a medically qualified provider. So I'm a psychologist, so I don't, do the injections, but our Stella MDs are vetted and trained by Dr. Eugene Lipov. He is our chief medical officer, and he is the person who published the first case study, really making this connection in 2008, that this procedure, which has been around for 100 years and used for pain, not new, can really help relieve these target symptoms of trauma exposure. So a routine anesthetic that's widely used is injected into a bundle of nerves a few inches above the collarbone. So it's minimally invasive. It's considered a safe and ethical treatment option for post-traumatic stress disorder. And frankly, to me, it's one of the most promising innovations I've seen in decades in the field, that almost nobody knows about in civilian society, even in the military tribe. There are very few people relative to the group as a whole that have heard about this and have really understood the potential of this. So part of the reason we do these live webinars is to really help this option hit a tipping point in awareness. Here are some key points in the research. As I said, stellate ganglion block has been in use for about 100 years. The first use was documented in 1926 in the medical journals. And then the first documented use for a psychiatric reason, it was documented in 1947. And then there are many studies that have come since then. I mentioned the 2008 case study where Dr. Lipov kind of made this connection and actively pursued this hypothesis that stellate ganglion block would really effectively treat these symptoms of trauma. And then in 2019, there was a really important study. It was an RCT, or randomized clinical trial, at 3 military medical sites. And it was published in JAMA Psychiatry and showed that SGB is a safe and effective, very promising treatment for trauma. And the research really is going to continue to grow from there. Stella is going to be advancing some research, and there are other pioneers doing this work who are continually advancing the research. One of the studies I really wanted to highlight today is so new that it's not on our timeline here as yet, but I'm sure that we will be adding it. So Dr. Jim Lynch just published a study where he looked at the opinions and attitudes of behavioral health providers who don't deliver the injection, but who treat patients after they have received a stellate ganglion block injection. So he polled a sample of 27 providers. Some of them were psychologists, there were licensed professional counselors, there were also some psychiatrists, so behavioral health providers that do not provide the injection, but who treat people afterwards. And 95% of them said that they would recommend stellate ganglion block to a colleague as far as a treatment that helps accelerate and enhance the outcomes that they're able to achieve with the work that they do. Our results for Stella are frankly hard to believe unless you've seen it yourself, like I have many times in the operating room. I've treated about 50 patients now with Dr. Lipov and other physicians. And we're seeing a 28.9 point drop as an average reduction on the PCL. Robin's going to talk a little bit more about the PCL, but it's basically an assessment measure of the severity of trauma symptoms. And to put this in perspective, a 10-point drop on the PCL is considered a good outcome, something to celebrate, according to standards set by the National Center for PTSD. So we have an outcome that's nearly 3 times what is considered a clinically significant improvement. And to further put this in perspective, that's like taking somebody who is extremely debilitated with their symptoms of hyperarousal and bringing them to a place where they may not even meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD, usually within 1 day at the clinic, sometimes 2 days at the clinic. And what we've also found that is, pending publication is that across all different kinds of trauma types, we polled, uh, patients who had had a variety of different trauma exposures, and we found that it doesn't matter what the cause of the trauma is, that the impact and the outcomes of the stellate ganglion block on helping them restore a sense of calm within their own bodies was the same, regardless of the type of trauma, or interestingly, when it happened. Some of the traumas were recent, a recent street crime or an assault, or some of them were, years ago and just unaddressed. In both cases, we were able to get really incredible outcomes, regardless of the type of trauma or when it occurred. Stella has been working overtime to scale up across the country. Since October 2020, where we started with one site in October 2020, one site in Chicago, we now have 19 sites across the country and 2 in Australia. So we're launching internationally, and we're putting Stella providers, these are the MD providers that provide the stellate ganglion block injection, to be clear, all across the country, so that people don't have to fly or drive, and travel doesn't become a barrier for getting this procedure if they want it. We do not do therapy in-house. We work with providers like Robin and networks of providers across the country to fill out a complete continuum of care. And one of the things we'll be doing is we've just finished production of about 10 or 12 educational videos that will help providers who are talk therapy providers know how to support their patients, how to support their patients well before, during, and after SGB. So understanding what SGB is, what the potential of this treatment is, and how they can really support their patients well through our part of the patient journey. And this is really, partnership in treatment. So we want to create meaningful partnerships where we collaborate and we take care of people together as part of one extended collaborative team. And so I want to bring on Robin Saunier. Robin is in Louisiana, and I don't remember how we got connected, Robin. So I might ask you to remind me of how we first connected to kind of drop in, but somehow we had a lot of alignment around our heart for supporting the military tribe and our work with trauma, some of the focus that we have shared on that, working with the traumatized population, whether military or civilian. And then we had both been exposed to the power of stellate ganglion block as primer before the paint. And so I thought you would be a great person to bring on and really kind of have a conversation with you about your journey as a provider in working with the stellate ganglion block and what you've seen about some of those outcomes. So to get us started, do you remember how we connected? Could we start with that one?
Yeah, so I read your book, Warrior, and I remember reading your book, and I was just so connected to that book because it was so aligned with who I am as a, professional working with that population. And I knew there was something, that had that alignment for us. And so I reached out. I attended one of the first Stella webinars, and through there, we got in contact and we were able to have some conversations and really see that alignment, see that, we were doing some of the same things in terms of, working with the same population and with SGB and some of that. And so that's how we initially got connected.
That's right. Awesome. Okay. So let's start with the PCL. Maybe you could help people understand, for those perhaps unfamiliar, what is the PCL and how do we assess trauma symptom severity when we're working with patients who have trauma exposure?
Yeah. So, like you were saying earlier, there's a lot of people who will experience post-trauma symptoms who may or may not need a formal diagnosis for PTSD, but they're still good candidates for, trauma-informed therapy like SGB or other interventions. So the PCL, it's a PTSD self-assessment. So that means that, the client will fill that out themselves, or they can fill that out in session with the therapist. And it measures those 20 symptoms that we look at for PTSD. And so there's a range of 0 to 80 score wise, and then a score of about 31 to 33 is indicative that there's a probable, diagnosis of PTSD that'll be met. So if we're looking at a 31 to 33 score somewhere in that line, we're looking at someone who's at least suffering pretty significantly from some post-trauma symptoms. And like you mentioned earlier, a drop of just 5 to 10 points on that screening, right, is indicative of a reliable change. But then a drop of 10 to 20 points shows clinically significant change. And like you were saying with Stella's research, right, Stella has, in SGB in general, the research there shows about an average of a 28-point drop. So that's very significant when we're looking at that self-assessment measure.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the points is that very few people, even if they didn't have PTSD, would get a score of 0.
Mm-hmm.
So most of us, even though we might not meet a criteria for PTSD, will get a few points. So really, when we're up in that 30 range and above, that's when people like Robin and I start to notice and, think, well, there might be something here to treat. And you were going to talk about a case, and we had given him, a name that isn't his real name, just to protect privacy. I think we were going to call him Peter. I don't know your patient, you do. So could you tell us a little bit about Peter, because he's an example of somebody who received the stellate ganglion block and then you saw him for therapy, and would love to just get a little bit of background and help folks who are unfamiliar learn a little bit about who he is and what were his presenting challenges.
Yeah. So, Peter is a 44-year-old married white male. He was a combat National Guard veteran. He had multiple deployments from 2005 to 2010. So we're looking at, really the thick of some of those, high intense wars, a lot of combat there. He was diagnosed by the VA in 2006 with PTSD. Think about this. He was diagnosed in 2006 and had multiple deployments from 2005 to 2010. So even with the diagnosis of PTSD, he was still exposed to combat. Okay. So he had done multiple attempts at therapy, multiple attempts at medication management, had done a lot of that through the VA, and just really wasn't finding a lot of success. He left, his military career and was working in the oil field industry, which is very big here in Louisiana. But, that can be kind of hit or miss. And so he did get laid off. So when he got laid off, a lot of those distractions that he had from those post-trauma symptoms, that was removed. So then he was stuck at home, right, in the midst of a pandemic where a lot of the things that we normally can use as coping skills were removed from us. His wife is a stay-at-home mom who homeschools their children. So not only was he stuck at home, where he's someone who's used to going out, working, and things of that nature, but now he's stuck at home with his kids and his wife, right? So he was experiencing a lot of irritability, a lot of frustration, a lot of intrusive thoughts, some flashbacks. One of the main things that he talked about too is he would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like he was on patrol. Those typical PTSD symptoms of that hypervigilance, kind of that constant on edge, things that are pretty normal to us. Like, okay, you drop a pen, right? No big deal. You pick it up. That would incite rage in him, right? Like something as simple as, dropping an ink pen would make him, really, really frustrated. A lot of emotional detachment, using alcohol to try to numb and distract himself. So a lot of pretty significant impairment, right? That was heightened definitely by the pandemic. A lot there.
I'm glad you mentioned the role of the pandemic, because for so many of the people that we serve, and whether they're military or civilian, the pandemic and all of the disruptive life changes that have happened as a result have really ramped up trauma for a lot of people. And as you said, really removed our normal coping outlets, they're just gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's been the biggest obstacle I've seen for people, in the past year, really over a year now, is that those things that we were able to utilize to help us cope, to help us to get through these, different symptoms that we're experiencing. I mean, those things were removed. As we know, right, as behavioral healthcare providers, connection, human connection is such a vital part of healing and growth and coping. And, the pandemic really, really eliminated a lot of that for a lot of people. And so, no matter whether you were struggling with symptoms before or not, right? Like that definitely made things difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I know a lot of veterans, I'm sure you do too as well, Robin, whose coping mechanism was going to the gym. So it was both, a hard physical workout,
Yeah.
but it was also done in a group and it
Yeah.
was done collectively. And then when those gyms shut down, it just was really hard for them to find that same sense of connection or that same outlet. And so there's a lot of, energy that kind of gets blocked from being expressed in a healthy way. And that can come out as helpless frustration and rage for a lot of people, not just veterans. This is, a lot of us are experiencing this. And so I think, what will happen is when you have your coping defenses removed and you're home all the time, just as you're saying with Peter, all of those symptoms will emerge, in kind of technicolor. And then the thing is, do you have a way to get those addressed? Do you have a way to get those treated? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't, or they haven't heard about effective options that are available and that are efficient in treating those symptoms. But you were able to develop a treatment plan with Peter where he was able to get an SGB and then go into therapy with you, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So what did you notice from before he got the SGB to how he looked and sounded and it reported to be right after the SGB part before he started the therapy?
Yeah. So, right before, because we always do an assessment before. And so right before we did, a diagnostic interview, we did an assessment. We talked about some of those symptoms. You could just tell he was tense. He was on edge. He was frustrated. He was at that point where, he was like, I've tried everything there. I know you're saying this could work, but I've tried everything. I've done these things, for multiple years, and really it'll work for a little bit. And then nothing really kind of, lasts long term. And, you could just feel that energy from him, right? Of that, like, not hopelessness, but that frustration, right? That stuckness.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important, the point you're making right here. So the variant of that I've been writing about is when people feel like trauma is a life sentence, when they don't find effective treatments, that's a high stakes kind of thing, because when they feel like it's always going to be this way, it's never going to change, and there's no treatment that can get me into a lasting healing state, that is going to predictably lead not just to a helpless anger, but sometimes into a mental health crisis.
Right.
And so my interest in really fusing Stella with the treatments that people like yourself offer is to not only give them a sense of, no, there is an effective option for you, and we can help you maintain gains if you get the therapy after, to change the thinking and behavior that maintains the trauma response.
Right.
So you saw Peter after the SGB. Do you happen to remember what his score drop was?
Yeah. So it was pretty crazy, but he had a 40-point drop 2 weeks following the SGB injection. So he initially scored a 56, and then just 2 weeks after that injection, he had decreased to 16 points, which, I mean, that's very, very, significant. And I remember him, saying, wow, like, it's crazy how much lighter I feel. This is amazing. You could see that relief, right? Like, you could see that tension that was there before wasn't there anymore. It was like this weight had been lifted, from him. And that was even some of what he was able to say. He was like, this incident that just happened with my wife normally would send me into a fit. And he was like, I just laughed. He's like, this is amazing. I just laughed at something that would normally make me so angry and so frustrated and create conflict in my relationships. And it was just in 2 weeks, and we hadn't even done any therapy really yet. You know, he had just gotten the injection and was already experiencing some of that relief, which then helped him to feel more optimistic about doing the actual long-term therapy that needed to be done, right? Like there was no longer this block of, oh, this is going to be so miserable and there's going to be no relief from this. It was like, okay, now there's some space, right? Like your client says, this is the primer to the paint. Now there's some space for me to go in and do this difficult trauma work without it feeling so heavy and incapable.
100%. You know, and I hear those reports from so many of my patients, variants of, I feel so much lighter. I feel like somebody just lifted 1,000-pound weight off my chest, sometimes that they didn't even know was there.
Right.
Or examples of, you know, that thing that would have really sent me through the roof, it didn't bother me the same way, right? And so not only has he now gotten into a hopeful approach response for all the therapy that you're going to do, but you've actually you've built trust with him there, because you've said, there is something I think could help you, and we're going to do the therapy as well. And he said, I've, you know, done everything. He was in that distrustful state of, I don't know, I've heard it all, seen it all. And so when you got that outcome, and I've had this experience many times, then it built trust with you, because you were able to get him into a treatment that delivered on that. It's not that 100% of people this works for, but it works for most people. And as long as that's presented in a fair and balanced way, that it works for most people. And this really may help you. When it does, which is most of the time, it not only gives patients new hope, but it also elevates your status as a trusted provider, so that you can go into that space that's been created to help him do the work, changing the thinking and behavior. And I'll say one more thing before I ask the next question, which is, I was just listening to a podcast that several veterans forwarded to me and said, you got to listen to this podcast. Dakota Meyer came on, was talking with Jocko Willink, and he said that SGB, I love this analogy too. It's like a flashbang that, you know, you throw that in the room and it gives you space and time to do the other things that you need to clear the room.
Yeah.
And so I love that analogy, because it's, you know, the primer before the paint, or the flashbang before you go in and clear up the thoughts and the behaviors and the patterns that maintain the trauma response. And that's what we really need: skilled healthcare providers that do talk therapy and other holistic practices to help people to regulate their bodies, to change their thinking patterns. So tell us a little bit about his therapy journey that you and he pursued after he got the SGB.
Yeah. So, you know, I do specialize in trauma. And so I do work from a variety of different trauma informed techniques when I'm working with a client. So I really do, you know, try to assess the client for what feels best and appropriate for that client, very much individually. And most of the time for my clients, I do like to start with some just traditional talk therapy. Let's talk about the trauma. Let's talk about the incident. And then I'll kind of shift into some narrative work. And so this is what I love about SGB, because, you know, trauma work really in pretty much any sense requires some form of exposure to that traumatic event or memory, so that we can go in and do some reprocessing, right? And so we as clinicians have to make sure that we're not going in and re-traumatizing that client. And I love that SGB helps to reduce those arousal symptoms that can typically lead to some of that re-traumatization if not appropriately handled on the front end, right? So what I loved about SGB was it really took a big gap of the work that I would have had to do to reduce those symptoms and to stabilize that and to form, you know, appropriate coping for all of those things as we do trauma work. It kind of did a lot of that work for me in a sense, right? So that now we could shift into some of this trauma work. And so, you know, we started with some talk therapy, we started with some narrative work, and then we transitioned into, you know, some EMDR. And I loved that we were able to do that. So, you know, his trauma was he was on a deployment and unexpectedly a truck, you know, got hit or, you know, experienced one of an unfortunate event where an IED happened and the truck flipped over and individuals were killed, right? And so he was there, and he was a witness to a non-combat related death. So I think that that was a big part of this being such a trauma for him, was that he was expected to experience death in the midst of combat, right? But this was them just hanging out, right? And it was very unexpected. And so his vivid memory was of a Marine. He was in the National Guard. So he was, this was a Marine, a young Marine who was killed, in this flipping of the vehicle. And his memory was connected to the body being really mangled and twisted up under the truck and with the sandbags. And he had a vivid memory of the Marine's name tag on the back of his pants. And I remember him saying he was so frustrated because no one else was helping him to get the body removed. And so he was the only one being exposed to this really horrific experience, right? And he was frustrated, and he was kind of, pissed off at everybody else for not happening, or for not helping, and for what was happening. And it was really sticking with him for a long time. And I mean, think about this, he was deployed from 2005 to 2010. It's 2021. He's been living with this for a long time. That's a long time to hold on to this memory. And so we were able to do some trauma work, and we did an EMDR reprocessing session on that. And EMDR, for those of you who don't know, is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's a form of therapy that uses alternating bilateral stimulation to kind of keep the client grounded into the present moment as we're reprocessing that traumatic material, so that new information can come in on that trauma memory that helps to change the way that the body is essentially storing that trauma memory. So we can't go in and undo a memory, right? We're not magicians. We can't change something that happened, but what we can do is we can go in and change the way that the body is holding onto that memory, therefore the way that the body is exhibiting post-trauma symptoms, right?
Right. So one of the things I wanted to pull out from what you just shared is the standard of treatment in the conventional sense right now is often to have patients repeatedly recount that trauma in detail while they are in a state of fight or flight.
Right.
Because they come into us in a state of fight or flight. And if we don't target that biological injury, they will be in the room with you in a state of fight or flight, highly activated, which is a very uncomfortable and aversive mind state to find themselves in. And so we would have them habitually, recount that trauma memory until the impact of it subsides. That's treatment as usual. And getting patients to agree to that process, having them go through that process, it's painful for both the patient and the provider. Speaking for myself, I was trained in that type of therapy for a little while. I did that. I got trained in EMDR, and I found EMDR to be a more gentle approach because of the grounding. So now I could do this work of having them approach what they would rather avoid, but with the grounding that EMDR offers to people. Now the shift is that with the SGB first, the body is able to enter that approach of the trauma in a calm state. And that is a game changer. And I find it really interesting that even though, this is not as yet widely offered throughout the VA, there is an office of, it's called, I think, the VA Office of Compassionate Care. It's got the word compassionate in it. And I thought that was so interesting, because that's the heart of it, is that this is a way, with SGB and therapy together, sequenced in that way, primer before the paint. This is a way to help people approach what they would rather avoid in a compassionate way, and help them move into that space and do the work they need to do to change those underlying thoughts and patterns without being so jacked up that I was worried about sending them out to drive on the freeways.
Right.
In that state, after therapy as usual. So I really, came to an epiphany that that whole model needs to change, and we need to sequence care and treat people's biological injury before we do the work that we can do. So I'm so glad your experience is really highlighting that, because, to our topic today, this is about what combining treatment tells us about the recovery journey. And I think so far you've established through this case and others that people need to feel there's hope of, feeling better, a new normal. And nothing does that like a treatment that works 83% of the time with
And
one day at the
instantly.
clinic that can drop them 28 points, 40 points on the PCL. That's just an incredible outcome. And then they need to feel like they can approach their trauma while they're in the right mind state. It needs to be compassionate care that we offer. And this is how, we're able to do this with the combination of SGB and therapy. So how did Peter progress, and how's he doing now?
Yeah. So it's so exciting because, a big part of the struggles for Peter was that, he was unemployed. He had been unemployed for a while. That was creating, some self-worth, some self-identity issues for him. And so he is continuing to experience, he says, no intrusive thoughts about trauma at all. If trauma stuff does come up for him, it's just something that happened, right? It's just a memory. It's nothing that is significant or impairing him. He's more patient and tolerant with his family. He is experiencing more happiness, more pleasant events. He's engaged in more, hopeful activities, and he actually got 2 job offers as of recently. So, we went from someone who was unemployed and was struggling. I mean, and this is a very intelligent, very capable, he has the skills, right? I mean, it is a pandemic, so it is difficult to find a job, but, all those things were available. And I think you and I had discussed this earlier, right? Like, it's no coincidence, right?
Yeah.
That he's able to get this trauma resolution and he's feeling better, and that self-doubt has dissipated, and now he has 2 job offers, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence. I've seen hundreds of patients, veteran and otherwise, over my career, and this happens too frequently to say, well, it's coincidence for the 100th time. When people have their trauma addressed effectively, their whole energy shifts, like the way they present and all of their nonverbals shift. You and I can tell when somebody is sitting in the room with us and they are distracted by their trauma, or they're overwhelmed by things that are playing out in their mind's eye, or they feel, like they're failing because they're not getting healing or relief, right? That gets communicated through nonverbals, through the way they hold themselves, their energy, the way they walk, all of it. When people feel successful and they feel like they have been effectively treated and they're hopeful and they've found a new normal, all of that is communicated. So his ability to get a new job, or 2 new jobs actually, is absolutely not a coincidence. I'm not making a claim that treatment with Stella and SGB can get everybody their dream job here, but I am saying that there's a lot of wasted potential because we haven't, by and large, offered as a society effective, efficient treatment that's sequenced in the right way. And when we get that nailed, a lot of people are going to be able to do a lot more work that will help them realize their potential.
Yeah.
We have here, I'm being joined, I want to give you one more question here for a second, and then I'm going to be joined by our mystery surprise guest, Mary Cortani, who is a top CNN hero, by the way. And she's lovely and does really important work in partnership with Stella. But Robin, tell people how they can find you and connect with you or Acadiana or anything else that you want us to know about.
Yeah. So the easiest way, to contact me would be through my email, which I know that you guys are going to put out for everyone. So the easiest way is to contact me through my email. If anyone is interested in the HEAL program, part of the Acadiana Veteran Alliance, which helps fund treatment for SGB for veterans, that would qualify for that. They can reach me through the same email, and I can forward them the information as well there. But it's been a pleasure to have me here. So thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this. You're one of our first Stella providers. Stella we haven't even done the training yet. So we'll be looking forward to sharing that with you as soon as we have it. But it's been awesome to have you on, and we look forward to continuing to change people's lives and save some lives with the collaborative work that we're doing together. So we appreciate you as being an emotional first line responder and in the trenches of that work with traumatized patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Robin. now I'm pleased to present Mary, who has had her vaccinations. So we are mindful of safety here. And this is Mary Cortani. She is in leadership here at Operation Freedom Paws. And I am on site today, as I mentioned, checking out her operations. Puppy yoga is to come as part of my day, which I'm so excited about. Don't have a mental image of that yet, but it seems fabulous. And I just wanted to give Mary a quick opportunity to talk a little bit about how Stella and Operation Freedom Paws have been partnering in really meaningful ways. We've treated about 20 patients that have gone through, clients that have gone through Mary's operation here. So Mary will be a feature of a future Stella webinar, but let me turn it over to you, Mary, to share about our partnership.
Well, hello, everyone. And, thank you, Dr. Shauna Springer, for being here today. We love having you at Operation Freedom Paws. And I have to say, this all came about in our partnership in a really strange way, but obviously the universe spoke and meant for it to happen. I happened to watch one of these webinars that I found on LinkedIn. And, I try and be a sponge with anything related to veterans, post-traumatic stress, military sexual trauma, and the issues that they face. And when you were presenting the webinar, when you were talking about the research, and it was about the research of the Stella ganglion block, and I had no idea what it was, right? And I was so intrigued, and I heard you at some point talking about that in the future you wanted to build partnerships. And so, for a couple of days, I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I reach out to Stella? Is this going to make sense to them? And one of the things that you said that resonated with me so much had to do with, it's not the magic bean, right? That you have to do the other modalities along with to enhance the effect of the SGB and have it lengthen that healing, and that those other modalities and putting those tools in the tool belt was what would help them to move forward. So, and that resonated for a lot of reasons, because one of the things at Operation Freedom Paws that makes us a little different than a traditional service dog organization is, one, our program is 48 weeks long. The dog is really the easy part. We could do that traditional model and have a trainer train the dog, and then take our clients and put them through a 2-week, a 4-week, or an 8-week boot camp, but they wouldn't truly be utilizing the dog to its maximum potential and gaining the benefits from that human canine bond in a far greater capacity. Everyone that has a pet, that pet brings comfort. It brings emotional support. You can have a bad day and they don't care. You walk through the door and they're all over you. Where you been? What you been doing? I'm glad to see you. Well, this is so much more than that. And so hearing you say that, it was like, man, I got to figure a way out. And out of the clear blue, as I'm trying to figure out how do I reach out and even broach this subject, your CEO called, because unbeknownst to me, you guys were doing research on that for who's in the field working with clients with post-traumatic stress, especially veterans. And we had an amazing phone call. And then things just rolled. Jim put me in touch with you, in touch with Greg, and all these people at Stella. And it was such an easy partnership. And I think the reason that it's such an easy partnership, and I've spoke about it a little bit, is it's not about competition. It's about truly working together, collaborating, and being able to help each other to be successful with our clientele. And I have found it extremely refreshing. I'm a veteran myself, having come out of the business world in high tech and working my way up to be executive. That whole competitive thing, it just, it wears you down. And I'm even trying within the service dog world through organizations that I'm a member with, is to also get them to realize, yes, we're all going to have our trade secret. There's 1,000,001 ways to train a dog, but what's the common goal? and we should be collaborating on that common goal. What methodologies we use to get there isn't as important as that common goal. Those methodologies can bring uniqueness to achieving it, but when we collaborate on the common core elements, we're going to be more successful as a whole. And that's one of the things that I found with Stella. And I have to tell you, when I picked, when we partnered and I picked clients, I intentionally did this because you see the videos and you see that wow factor, people that are able to articulate that weight was lifted off of their shoulders or their chest, right? They feel that relief. Well, I know from working with veterans, even with the service dogs, that not all of them are going to be able to articulate that right off the bat, because a lot of them are still trying to process their emotions and their feelings and begin to feel again. Mm-hmm. So I was naive in the beginning and said, oh, okay, I want to see this wow factor. Well, I see the wow factor in a different way. Mm-hmm. So when we partnered, we thought we were going to have to go to San Diego, but unbeknownst to me, you guys were working in the background to open up a location in San Jose, which is right in my backyard. And so as we're getting ready to set up the appointments, find out you have San Jose, we go to San Jose, which is awesome because I have actually been with our clientele. And the San Jose facility, Dr. Watford is just amazing. Their staff is amazing. Our service dogs go in with. And then we have myself or a family member is actually with the dog while the procedure is taking place. They come out from the procedure and the dog is there. So for me, we teach our clients to read their dog's body language. Dogs communicate through body language. And so they may not be able to tell you they're feeling a difference, but because 60% of the dog's brain is dedicated to the sense of smell. And so we know we're made up of a whole bunch of stuff, right? And our chemistry changes and the dog's nose is so sharp, it can get through everything that we try and mask with. It knows when we're getting anxious and the flashbacks are occurring, the migraines, the pain, all of that stuff, that when our clients came out from the procedure, right, the dog was really excited to see, wanted to check on, like, are you okay?
Yep.
Because prior to going in for the procedure, they were alerting like crazy because our clients were anxious, right? So here comes the client back into the recovery area. The dog goes up, sniffs, and immediately lays down. It's no longer trying to either jump on, paw, nudge, get the handler's attention. They're like, oh, you're okay. I don't have to work. And right down, and I'm like, okay, that's the wow.
Yeah.
But I have the dog to see and I know what I'm looking at.
Yeah. You're a bit of a dog whisperer. And as we've had a couple of really long conversations on the phone as well. And as we've done that, it's been really interesting to know that, I was on a Bay Area, I still am, on a Bay Area television program called Veterans Voices, where I've been for 5 years. And we had a few years back an unofficial show dog that would sit on the stage before COVID. And it was Mary's organization that provided that dog to somebody I worked with on the show. So there were all these overlaps, and we've just found today that there are people that we absolutely know that know both of us and trust both of us. And so it's really been such a pleasure to kind of do this work with you, because the premise has been a lot of money is spent on, training dogs, bonding them, pairing them, all of that investment of time and energy and money. It's so much better when people are calm in their own bodies. That whole process of being available for the bond that can happen is just totally different. And so,
absolutely.
Right. So sequencing it with the stellate ganglion block and then everything that you guys are doing to change people's lives becomes critical.
Right. And so I that is such an important point. When we picked our client, the first ones, I intentionally did it this way because you never want to put all your eggs into one basket. And you also want to prove that the logic that you're applying is going to enhance the program, because I'm really protective of our clients and the program and what we do. And so I intentionally picked clients who had either been certified, were further along in the 48-week program, and those that were just starting. And so we've actually now incorporated the Stella questionnaire into our onboarding. So we know right off the bat, and we send it over to Stella for the analysis. And, would this client be a good candidate for it? Because not everyone will.
Yeah.
Right. There are medical issues and other reasons why the Stella ganglion block wouldn't work. And I have to tell you, the results are just, it's across the board. And I told Dr. Springer that I actually want to have this conversation because does a personality type or a personality disorder come into play with someone who is more rigid, right? Which is a whole nother subject I'm sure we could go on about.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you a story about Maureen.
Okay.
So Maureen has been with me for probably 4 years, and she had graduated, and we encourage our clients to always come back. This is their home. We're never going away. In the military, we have a saying, we've got your six, which means we've got your back. Those here are not empty words. We truly know what they mean. And so we have clients that graduated all back in 2010 that still come back because this is what they termed the coin OFP family. I didn't. But so anyway, Maureen with the service dog got to a certain point, right? She was out, she was able to go to the grocery store, she was able to socialize, but she still wasn't living to her full potential of enjoying life and truly happy. So, and I knew this, the dog can get you to a certain point because we tell our clients every day, the dog is the easy part. You have to do the hard work on yourself. And we require that they are in therapy, that they're seeing their psychiatrist, that they're in a group, or they're doing something to enhance what we're doing. And so Maureen was one that I picked right off of the bat, and Army veteran, living with MST and post-traumatic stress for years because she came out of the Desert Storm era. And lo and behold, she comes out of the procedure, and her dog, who's always on her because she's always in that heightened anxious state, sniffed her, gave her a lick, laid down, and for the first time, Maureen had a gut laugh. And I just went, wow, okay. And then, she's normally quiet and reserved, and you can get her to talk by asking questions or knowing what her interests are. So I drove her to the appointment and drove her back. So on our way to the appointment, it was interesting because, I'm worried about getting there on time. It's the very first appointment, and something popped the tire. So I'm careful. I get to the appointment. I'm stressed, and she had taken half of an anxiety med. So she's fine. I'm the one that's getting stressed because I'm worried about getting there, right? And she just and she was a little bit talking on the way there. On the way back, she yacked my ear off, and we were laughing. And a couple of days goes by, and I'm checking in on her, and she's like, wow, I feel so much lighter. I'm happy. I like this. And I was like, okay, this is it. And I have seen that repeatedly. I've had other clients say that the sights, the sounds, the smells. And so it is just a great way to enhance what we do here at Operation Freedom Paws. And it really proves the point that you have to do more than just one thing.
Absolutely. We have Robin Sonia here, who's a provider who does talk therapy following the SGB. And so she's just been sharing with us, but it's really fun to see that transformation. Like that was my favorite part of doing the clinical work when I was in a clinical role, and to be able to see that continually with this combined treatment approach. And I think one of the biggest misnomers is that, this is called stellate ganglion block. It comes out of the pain procedure, history medically. So that's the name of it, stellate ganglion block. But to your point, it doesn't block people's experience of emotion or their ability to have meaningful, positive, loving connection with others around them. It's quite the opposite. It actually frees them up to experience a full, healthy range of emotions and be available for connection, not only with their service dogs, but with friends and loved ones around them. So I have seen that also repeatedly, and it's so much fun. Robin, do you want to add anything here as we're kind of wrapping up?
No, I think that, the biggest thing to kind of think about is that SGB really is like a partnership, right? It's a partnership with additional therapy modalities, service dogs, traditional talk therapy, etc. And so it really does lend itself for partnerships, right? It's not a one and done situation. It really is a partnership, to really produce really effective trauma treatment. We're looking at people who are really suffering. So the fact that there's something out there, that can really be impactful in this way. And that's what we're meant to do as clinicians, right? To work together to provide holistic care. And so this is just, another modality to achieve that.
Yeah, well said. That to me is the heart of a healer, is if you don't offer what your patient could benefit from, you get it for them. You advocate for them to access that care, even if you don't offer it yourself. We've had, to your point about the competition in the business sector, a lot of people saying, this is my lane, protecting my lane, stay out of my lane. And Stella is really different. We're saying, there's no lane. We're all on a common mission. This is one mission, and we will work with treatment providers, therapy dog partnerships to get people their best outcomes, because it really is a shared mission. And I think that's how the military thinks as well. And so particularly when we're serving military patients, but really everyone would benefit from this paradigm shift in care. So thank you both for coming and joining me today. And Mary, we'll talk about some more stories, in a future Stella webinar, where we really kind of follow this for a bit longer, but awesome to have you both here. And wish you all well as you progress in your work and in your mission. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, again, thank you. And nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you, Mary, Robin. Thanks so much for being here, and we hope to see you all again on the future webinar.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Okay.
Gone.
Is it?